Welcome back. Let's get right to the panel. Joining me now is Kevin Frey, Washington correspondent for New York One. Former Maryland Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards. She is also an NBC News contributor, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Thanks to all of you for being here. So this is another incredibly busy week for the Trump administration. Let's start with this spending freeze. It's been a little confusing. They sent out a memo basically halting federal aid and spending on some of these key organizations, and then they reversed. There was a legal intervention, and now they're basically rescinding the memo. That's a legal maneuver, according to our Kelly O'Donnell. What do you make of it? Yeah,
but at the same time, I mean, look, the Democrats have really found an issue finally after about a week and a half of what are they doing, what are they focusing on. They have one now, and Senator Schumer has been having now daily events about this to try to pound Republicans in the White House for their handling of this. He today was citing the fact that he was getting calls from nonprofits, from organizations back home, from Republican local officials who were calling his office saying, what the heck do we do about our infrastructure investments and other things, projects that we're working on back home? So they believe that they finally have an issue after kind of receiving plenty of criticism that they weren't necessarily latching on to one issue and coming up with one strategy to combat the White House. They seem to have at least found their first one.
It's a really great point, Matt. And what we're seeing, I mean, in watching this all unfold, some people are saying, you know, Trump got off to a very quick start in terms of signing executive orders, laying out his policy agenda, and then this felt a little bit like the first Trump administration, putting out a policy, rolling it back, getting the backlash, and then, you know, reacting to that.
The hallmark of the first 10 days was really precise and precision in his all executive orders and everything it did. It had a very clear plan through the host of them. This was the first one that felt very vague. And I think it allowed a vacuum to form among Democrats that they could really pile onto this, because even a lot of Republicans weren't really clear. And one note I took note of, Dave McCormick, right, the new senator from Pennsylvania, kind of almost took credit. He's like, we heard a lot of input from Pennsylvanians about this. And so that was a little bit telling to me, but you're right. This was the first one where there was a vagueness to it that allowed Democrats to latch on to.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, Donna, this is what Hakeem Jeffries posted. He said, round one goes to Team America. We remain in the ring until far-right extremism has been completely and totally knocked out. So again, to this point that Kevin raises, Democrats are trying to find their messaging and footing. They've latched on to this. But what do you make of it? They're not quite out of the wilderness yet, to put it mildly.
No, but I do think that what happened here is that this had a real-world impact. I mean, most federal payments are made by an electronic payment system. That all stopped. And that is what resulted in calls from community health plans and nonprofits and, you know, a whole slew of organizations and government entities. And so it was an easy one in some ways for Democrats to grab because it had a very tangible impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
And it also plays into the messaging that Democrats had certainly been leaning into in the last couple of weeks, which is that we are the party that's looking out and actually care about trying to bring down prices, whereas the Trump White House is all distracted. You can argue whether or not that's accurate, but at least that fits into their paradigm that they've been operating on.
Matt, the urgency for them to bring down prices, there's been so much focus. He's only been in office a few days, but the timeline, I mean, they must feel that urgency to actually be able to show some work.
I don't think yet. I think Democrats have tried playing this gotcha game, taking pictures of egg prices, you know, with 5 days in. I think it misses the point a little bit as suddenly people now are blaming now Trump for the price. I don't think it's that. I think you'll start to see as we go into the spring, and as there's a bill, whether it's, you know, energy, taxes, that will, I think, start to kind of crystallize a lot of this happening right now. But I'm not that worried about that political concern quite yet.
Well, you take me to my next point, which is that Republicans had a retreat. They talked about their agenda. How were they going to get it through? This is what House Speaker Johnson had to say. Take a look.
We believe that we are going to engage now in what can be one of the greatest pieces of legislation in the history of the United States Congress, because it will be so consequential, because we have to fix everything, and we have a mandate from the people to do so.
Kevin, obviously, Speaker Johnson, President Trump, they want this big, beautiful bill, which President Trump describes it as basically lumping everything together, the border, taxes. What are you hearing about how realistic it is to actually get that through?
Well, I mean, we'll start with, it's not even clear that they still have settled on what exactly the plan is going forward. Is it one bill,
that's a
or
good
is it
point.
two bills,
Yeah.
or is it, I mean, and what goes in these bills? And do you lump in the debt ceiling? That's probably a non-starter because of some of the Republicans that would need to get on board to pass the thing writ large. The bottom line is, whichever route they plan to take, which Trump arguably isn't really helping because he's kind of keeping the door open to two bills, even if he says he wants the one big, beautiful bill. The bottom line is, the Republicans all have to be in line behind this. There is no margin for error. They might pick up, one or two more seats in the next couple of months once some of those special elections go through, but that's still basically a paper-thin majority. And because there are different coalitions in the Republican caucus, be it the SALT caucus that wants to deal with state and local tax deductions, mainly in states like New York and California that help deliver them the majority, or if you look at the more conservative Freedom caucus that's going to balk if there are not sufficient cuts for them, there's a very fine line for Speaker Johnson to walk here.
There really is. Matt, how do you see it unfolding? What are you hearing about where they're leaning? I mean, it seems like he was arguing for this one big bill.
You're absolutely right. They almost need one big bill because they need to be able to entice the SALT provisions. Because if you remember, Elise Stefanik voted against a tax bill for the SALT provisions. Right. So they need as much as they can in one bill so that way they know it's a legislative priority. I don't believe you'll get much of anything until April at the soonest. And look, Trump's going to have to get involved very, very deeply in a way that he did at the end of the debt ceiling and the spending fight, but didn't at first. He needs to be in this in depth.
How do you see Democrats playing their hand in this? Is there anything that they are going to try to work with Republicans on, or are they going to basically try to be obstructionists?
Well, look, I do think that there is going to be some synergy around SALT taxes, for example, which are really important for a lot of Democratic members. But the reality is that Democrats are not going to get what they want. Their job is going to be to highlight the bad stuff so that the American people understand it. And you describe them as coalitions, not really coalitions, more like factions in the Republican Party. And we're seeing those play out. Many of those Freedom Caucus members, in fact, were not at the retreat. And I think that's a really key absence.
Interesting. Let's talk about the hearing today with RFK Jr. A lot of testy, heated exchanges. We just talked to Senator Lujan, who said he's leaning toward no. What were your big takeaways from the hearing today?
Well, it was really clear that RFK Jr. is way outside of the mainstream of healthcare policy, of science, and that was on full display today. He didn't seem to have a command of a lot of policy issues that are faced by the Department of Health and Human Services, and so it could give an out to a couple more Republican members to vote against him.
You know, Matt, there's the optics of these exchanges, and then there's the vote count. He can only afford to lose 3 votes, but we saw with Pete Hegseth, who was facing an uphill battle for defense secretary, in the end, he had the votes. Is it your assumption that in the end, RFK Jr. will have the votes?
Yes, because voting against a Republican nominee, if you're Susan Collins or Murkowski, the bank isn't endless. You get one, and they use one in Hegseth, obviously, maybe 2. You can't vote against everybody, right? So if you're Susan Collins, you're sitting there, you're thinking, I have maybe one more vote no. Do you want to use it on RFK, Tulsi? And again, might not make a difference at the end of the day as it didn't with Hegseth.
Yeah. So what do you make of that point, Kevin? Do you think that RFK Jr. is going to have the tougher time getting through, or Tulsi Gabbard? There are so many questions. And unfortunately, I only have 30 seconds left, but they're all for you.
I mean, thank you. No pressure. I mean, I would say keep an eye on folks like Senator Bill Cassidy, Senator McConnell as well, in no small part because of his own personal background and battle with polio, and then also, I mean, he has clearly concerns about Tulsi Gabbard as well. So if your model is correct and it's going to come down to which battles are you choosing, he's already given way on one, which didn't really have much of an impact because Senator Tillis didn't come along with him. So does he pick one or the other?
All right. Well, we'll be watching. Thank you for a great conversation, Kevin, Donna, and Matt, and for being so quick. Kevin, appreciate it. We're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now.